Over the 20-year history of the Battlefield franchise, there have been many great maps worthy of praise. Some maps become legendary, icons themselves of the Battlefield series and worth remembering for their balance, uniqueness, and special gameplay. This is the story of the best maps of Battlefield. Beauty and simplicity at its finest. Well, maybe a tad too simple. Guilin Peaks is a Battlefield 4 map launched with China Rising, the first DLC pack and frequently considered as the game's worst. Guilin was the lone standout, since it also featured Altai Range, Silk Road, and Dragon Pass. Contrasting the large scale and vehicular scope found in its siblings, Guilin was a medium, almost small map focusing on infantry combat. It is set in a tropical forest in Guilin, China, with a minimal circular map boundary dominated by two huge mountain formations known as karsts. 6 objectives are placed around the karsts, while a 7th sits within a cave network near the map's center. Each team has their respective deployment zones in the north and south, putting 2 of the flags in good proximity for breakouts and initial deployments. A set of 6 light bike transports can be found in each, as well as a single transport helicopter, the lone major vehicle on the map, and one which has major gameplay implications. Guilin's aesthetic is incredible, especially taking in the surrounding landscape. The environment is tropical in nature, and the background rivers and mountains are stunning, with the added mists and clouds. Other minor water sources in the forms of streams and tiered rice paddies help bring the level to life. Unfortunately, within the map boundary, a lot of this terrain isn't to the scale or perhaps the detail which would have made the level fully effective or flush with cover, as some of it goes underutilized and sparsely provided. There is a good balance of texture, but the jungle foliage, whether in the form of trees, shrubs, or moss, often lacks appeal unless approaching from specific angles where the lighting best suits it, or on the highest graphical settings. There are beautiful locations to be traversed, to be sure, but the problem has more to do with the Frostbite engine of Battlefield 4, and perhaps the recycling of certain tree assets from the same DLC pack, sometimes oddly placed alone on a hill. It is nevertheless a small disappointment considering the map's theme and dramatic background decoration. The scattering of large rocks and boulders around the map are of vastly greater consequence and frequency, making up the majority of cover. Their diverse formations are usually well placed and allow for excellent close or medium-ranged combat. Guilin's mountains, or karsts, are its standout features, both for their visual immensity and terrain opportunities. A network of detailed caves and streams runs beneath both, connecting the majority of the outside flags to the map's interior. 2 of these are located within the western karst, stretching downward toward the E and A objectives, while the eastern karst has a branch which primarily leads from the D point east towards the G flag. The ponds and streams flowing within, along with small lighting equipment, adds great depth and satisfaction, livening up dark areas with a sense of activity and life, and the added audio contributes as well. The water effects, lighting detail, and asset placement within these caves are by far its best aesthetic elements, creating a unique atmosphere separate from the outside flag layouts. These in turn provide multiple pathing options, hiding spaces, and flanking opportunities to a majority of both teams, as well as offer some of the best unpredictable and intense close quarters action to be found. Back outside, these mountains are not scalable from the main map floor. Unintentionally or not, the transport helicopters of each team frequently ferry players up to its often cumbersome summits, where they can place spawn beacons, snipe, shoot rockets, or more commonly fire frag round shotguns from almost invulnerable locations. This is more annoying than anything else, given the limited methods of removing such enemy activity, and is perhaps a small, inevitable detriment to a map with otherwise limited verticality abuses. Guilin's lighting is also done well. It does a great job casting shadows on the terrain and foliage below, and creates a few cinematic experiences around the caves. The one minor hiccup is the sun's placement on the US side and angled toward the China deployment. This might give the map the fullest exposure to lighting possible between karsts, but there is a potential to be blinded when climbing up the slopes to the D objective from the north. Being a terrain-based map, there are minimal assets or structures, and those present are almost always found around the 7 flags. Some have more than others, creating a disparity in cover available and enjoyment, or a resistance to playing on them at all. Simply called storage, the A objective on the far west is one of the best outlying flags, not because of any wild structural deviations, but rather the nearby terrain. Its tight proximity to the mountain and 2 of the major cave networks provide great accessibility, while the hill and rice paddies further west have a few spawn points on lower ground, offering more protection than other objectives. Furthest south, the comms station B flag is one of the map's more active and frustrating zones. It's a small point focused on 2 military bunkers and a few containers and radar equipment. A sizable rock formation sits just north, accessible by the nearby hill and used to irritating effect by players above shooting down into the radius. With little cover south beyond the flag, more commonly the terrible spawn points here draw intense fire from those rocks or even from the slope running down from the map's center. The C objective is water storage, and as such has 8 water tanks, giving this sparse area its meager identity. A lone hangar and a few small, indestructible sheet metal shacks complete the point. A second example of lackluster objective design, beyond the radius lies practically empty space, leaving it with yet more terrible spawn locations either open in the field or within one of the shacks. Being in the southeast section of the map, the point is also one of the more isolated. Downhill from the mountains, the available cover is scarce, so even traveling to it can be a pain and unrewarding. This is actually one of those times where as a player, you should just say, the helicopter team will get it, and focus on somewhere else. Even so, had it been built up more with safer spawns and a larger capture zone, it may have been worth the struggle to fight over. Delta, the cave. Far and away the most impactful, popular, and defining objective of the map is located in the dead center under a section of the eastern karst. At the intersection of nearly every other point on Guilin, squads and even whole teams collide within this tight and dimly lit natural wonder. Entrances from the western side provide multiple pathing options, and large boulders in the main chamber offer a smattering of cover. The area outside the cave can be just as frantic as players move across the map. A few containers, rock formations, and terrain hikes provide cover, but the space is large, so it is dangerous and common to be shot at from multiple angles, including the glitchy camping spot on the western karst ledge. Inside the cave, a passage leads eastward down toward the C and G flags. This tunnel is the most highly utilized, and seeing multiple battles pushing through from point to point provides some of its best gameplay. On the D flag, not 1, but 2 M32 grenade launchers are placed as battle pickups capable of mowing down whole squads, especially in the tight confines of the tunnels. Spawn points here are not too bad as they circle the vicinity and are next to boulders or in the caves, yet some still might put you in the firing line. The B-1 bomber trailer featured on other China Rising maps makes an appearance on Guilin as well, being located here in the center just outside the D cave. Active every 90 seconds after completing a pass, a user has a chance to call down an aerial bombardment. However, its effectiveness can be very random owing to its flight path and mountain obstructions, and ultimately is a net positive for everyone else. Assuming a player doesn't get screwed over by the explosive line of sight mechanics, in which a small shrub or stone can block all the damage, there remains massive kill potential during a run. And skilled or lucky players can even have an awesome moment of hitting the enemy transport helicopters with the cruise missile. In the northwest corner, the E flag is the sheds, and again, that really is on the nose. Far more scenic, it is essentially a counterbalance to the C flag on the opposite side, although the cover on the approach downhill is better as well. Also again, objects beyond the radius are extremely few, constituting more rough spawn locations and limited protection. Then there is F, the outpost flag, and I'll come right out and say it. This is the objective that gives Guilin a bad name. Heading down a rough slope from the D objective, the point amounts to a hole in the ground, and I'm mad about it. Given that other flags were named based on what they were made of, F could have been called folding table. cover on the radius is practically non-existent. Sightlines from literally every direction can see inside of it, and the spawn points, as you can easily guess, are some of the worst, being placed off to the side in the open for the most part. On top of all that, looking up toward the hill to offer some counterfire puts the sun in your face. Some other flags on the map may not have been great, but this feels unfinished, at least I hope it was, because it seriously undermines the overall flow and satisfaction of the map experience. G, the square, is conversely another of the best and most active objectives, especially since it connects to the D flag via the cave network. The tunnel exits just next to the point, elevated a few meters with a waterfall forming another stream. 4 structures encompass the square in the center, although these will be reduced to rubble during the round, leaving a fairly exposed field where it once stood. Even so, fighting continues heavily among the ruins and nearby shacks for that strategic importance. Spawn points here are also not the worst, but the area to the east is fairly empty, leaving those placements vulnerable, especially from enemies on the cave ledge. With no other major vehicles available, each team's transport helicopter is a valuable, yet rarely impactful tool. The constricted layout already has most objectives within a stone's throw from each other, so the addition of a helicopter seems almost superfluous. But in this case, the element of fun it delivers is immeasurable, and permits a sandbox asset elevating an otherwise infantry-focused design to one notably Battlefield. Effective yet risky, pilots run with friends or simply teammates on the guns, harassing infantry on the ground and using the mountains to dodge incoming rockets. It is common and enjoyable to see opposing chopper crews battle it out over the course of a round for that air dominance. The most trouble the vehicle can cause is ferrying players to the top of the center mountains, which is annoying, but practically doesn't achieve much toward the benefit of the team. They still take players off the map away from flags, and are often sitting ducks when parachuting down. Moreover, despite the glitchy nature of the geometry, players here are still vulnerable to vengeful enemy transport helicopters and the occasional bomber call-in. These high positions are truthfully a problem of their own making, as they never should have been within the playable area to begin with, preferably allotted as out of bounds in some way, or should have been too slippery or obstructed to utilize. At the same time, since they don't necessarily break anything, the occasional mountain dweller or spawn beacon does add to the dynamic flavor of the map. Guilin Peaks was also one of the Battlefield 4 levels which supported the air superiority game mode. However, instead of the typical stealth jets, it featured only attack helicopters, the only map in the entire series to do so. The map boundaries were slightly expanded to allow for 12 attack helicopters per team, which fought over the balloon capture point between the center karsts. This provided a wild and unique combat mode for pilots and gunners testing their helicopter might. Being of small scale, other game types like TDM, Obliteration, Rush, and Domination fit well into the layout and largely use the same playable space as Conquest with minimal alteration. The popular reception to Guilin Peaks is fascinating, especially when compared to other infantry staples of Battlefield 4, and is worth examination for analytical purposes. From a player perspective, you'll find opinions all over the spectrum on its quality and enjoyment. The most frequent complaints are from those who despise the sightlines, detest the terrain deviations, or still others who just hate getting shot in the back from multiple angles as a result of both. Meanwhile, a whole other group consider it one of Battlefield 4's best infantry designs, allowing for great experiences of all firing ranges and playstyles, dynamic scenery, minor destruction, no invasive heavy vehicles, and providing plenty of places to seek cover, flank, or surprise a horde of enemies for a cool killstreak. Looking around the maps of Battlefield 4, Lumphini Garden has far more player exposure, flatter terrain, problematic sightlines, and base contain issues. Locker and Metro, despite having far greater readability, are nonetheless meat grinders of epic scale, frothing with explosive spam and one-sided stops. The most relatable map, therefore, is Pearl Market, another of the game's infantry staples, and also one fraught with divisive opinions. Pearl, despite its urban intensity and quick flow, is hampered by overwhelming verticality advantages, exploitive spots and rooftop glitches, poor spawn points, and, thanks to the numerous stairwells and enterable structures, is plagued by the use of claymores, shotguns, and campy behavior. Comparatively to these examples, Guilin Peaks offers significant advantages. It is rarely full-capped by one team. In the event that it is, this position is rarely sustained thanks to the plentiful bikes and the transport helicopter. Admittedly, the deployments of both teams are invisible sightlines from a good chunk of the map, but as the contain never fully forms, this isn't too much of an issue. In fact, a minor positive in this case can be made of the ability to eliminate players hiding in the deployments firing off UCAVs all game. Terrain deviation is among the best in the game, despite Battlefield 4 setting a super low bar in this regard. Often the rocks and slopes create enough cover to break sightlines, even on some of the rougher angles, and the elevation changes flow well, creating diverse fighting environments within a small space. These allow for sudden, adrenaline-filled encounters, but also provide slower, ranged-heavy moments, fomenting different playstyles. Moments of high ground advantage, definitely a commonality, is temporary and almost always counterable or avoidable. Larger rock formations might provide camping players a momentary advantage, but they are inevitably set upon and dealt with since the map's scale makes utilizing the entire playable area extremely easy. To that degree, one might say that in traversing the map from point to point, more tactical awareness, steadier aim, and greater knowledge of the environment is required than on any other infantry design. The shifting engagement ranges also greatly reduce the tendency to encounter enemies using infuriating weapons like shotguns or claymores. In fact, the weapon diversity is usually fantastic. Even within the choke points of the tunnels, the wider size and frequent battles among large hordes often destroys claymores before they hit anything. From this perspective, there are decidedly more positive aspects to the map than comparable infantry staples, and it is clear that Guilin Peaks is the least problematic of any Battlefield 4 infantry design. By this logic and the avoidance of multiple major issues, Guilin Peaks should have a reputation far greater than what it does. It is not perfect, and ultimately I think recurring visits to the worst objectives on it propagate these negative inclinations more than anything. Spawn points along the edges are also frustrating, and these deserved to be adequately protected. However, the circular layout of the map never requires players to visit these areas. A final weakness might be the complete destructibility of the exterior flag structures, leaving them a tattered mess. Yet, this doesn't affect the nearby terrain formations whose cover lingers on. Guilin Peaks is all about fast movement and intense encounters. Like some Battlefield 1 maps that would follow, hordes of players rotating from point to point does happen. Only here, many players await those pushes with bated breath, eager to demolish a whole team in the tight confines of a tunnel with an explosive or the perfect flank. The battles are fierce and the downtime short. It's a map that unquestionably asks more of the player than other infantry layouts, and through great planning or great skill rewards those who take the time to master its picturesque environment.